Have you ever wondered who or what the serpent was before Eden? Not the symbolic figure that appears in sermons, but the hidden essence behind the one who first questioned the divine order. You may believe it or not, but what you're about to hear has been read by kings and forbidden for centuries, while many see the serpent merely as a symbol of evil. There's something much deeper and more disturbing hidden in its origins. What if I told you that, in ancient texts forgotten by the official religion, the serpent appears not as a villain, but as a primordial presence predating time itself? A living, cyclical energy that manifests where the divine and the earthly intertwine. Since ancient times, it has been portrayed as a symbol of wisdom, eternity, and even as the guardian of forbidden knowledge. In Gnostic records, between the lines of Genesis, and even in cultures that never geographically touched, the serpent appears as an entity that demands not worship but understanding. It offers no certainty but choices, and this, perhaps, is what is most frightening. Did the Bible reveal everything about it? Or was part of this story silenced, erased, disguised under metaphors so that only those with eyes to see could understand? What you're about to discover may surprise you because, contrary to what you've been told, not everything in creation was made solely of light. Stay with me until the end, because every detail of this revelation can change the way you see the mysteries of creation. The serpent may not have been a mistake, but a key piece in a larger plan, shrouded in layers of symbolism, ancient energy, and divine purpose. But before we reveal what the forgotten texts really say about her, we need to go back to the beginning, to the moment when the word had not yet been spoken and the serpent already moved in the shadows of primordial chaos. We must go back to the beginning, to the moment when the word had not yet been spoken and the serpent already moved in the shadows of primordial chaos, and this is where everything begins to take on new meaning. Because if the serpent predates even the concept of good and evil, then perhaps it represents something we haven't been allowed to understand, something that challenges the established order and, at the same time, reveals the origins of forgotten knowledge. At this point in your journey, I want to invite you to go beyond passive listening. If this topic resonates with you, if something touched you, or if a question lingers within you, share it in the comments. Talk to me. What do you feel when you hear this? Have you ever felt like there's something that's never been said, not even from the pulpit? Your participation here is what keeps this channel alive. What gives us the energy to continue unearthing these hidden truths which have been silenced for so long? Every like, every subscription, every comment is like a lit candle on this dark path we travel together. It's not about numbers. It's about creating a community of seekers who don't accept ready-made answers. So, if you want to continue receiving these revelations, the ones no one dares to tell, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. That way, you won't miss out when the next layer is revealed. And now, take a deep breath, because what we're about to explore next is perhaps the most controversial revelation of all. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this whole story of the serpent in Eden, of temptation and the fall, may not be the starting point, but rather the reflection of something much older, something that predates time, the heavens, and even names. And that's where the question changes. Who, in fact, was the serpent? Or what did it represent before being translated as a villain? Are we dealing with a being, a consciousness, or a primordial energy that never stopped acting? When we examine humanity's earliest mythological accounts from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from India to Mesoamerica, the figure of the serpent appears with a strikingly similar role, always linked to the cycle of life, rebirth, and hidden knowledge. This is no coincidence. These records, separated by oceans and centuries, depict a continuous, subtle presence that runs through the spine of creation like an invisible yet transformative force. In Egyptian tradition, the serpent Apophis represented the chaos that threatened order, but it was also the necessary impulse for the sun god, to be reborn each morning. In Hinduism, we encounter the Kundalini dormant energy, represented by a serpent coiled at the base of the spine, which awakens as human beings ascend spiritually. And in Gnostic texts, almost forgotten over the centuries, the serpent was seen as the true bearer of light, the one who breaks the dominion of ignorance, offering humanity the fruit of consciousness. So why, in official theology, has this figure been reduced to the image of a treacherous enemy? Perhaps because it represents exactly what control fears: the autonomy of the mind, the awakening of inner truth, the breaking of dogmatic structures. The serpent, in this context, not only offers knowledge, it delivers choice. And this, deep down, may be the most dangerous thing of all. Imagine the impact of a collective consciousness that begins to question the traditional narrative, that allows itself to think beyond limits, beyond imposed morality, beyond the surface of sacred texts. We're talking about a shift in mindset that doesn't settle for ready-made answers, but rather delves into the backstage of creation in search of the hidden essence. A journey that seeks not only to understand the serpent, but to rediscover one's own purpose. Because if this energy truly precedes the word, then perhaps it is present in everything that moves, everything that feels, everything that seeks meaning. And at this point, the serpent is no longer an isolated character. It becomes a symbol and, perhaps even a mirror, a reflection of our own spiritual restlessness. The doubt that won't go away, the force that awakens, the question no one asked, but that now needs to be answered. Comment here. That makes sense to me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because before we lose ourselves in forgotten mysteries, we must look closely at what has already been revealed to us, even if at first glance it seems too simple. Genesis, with all its dense symbolism and sacred language, doesn't just tell a story. It proposes a structure for the world, for good, for evil, and for what lies between the two. And it is in this in-between that the serpent appears, almost stealthy, yet absolutely central. Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. Thus begins his appearance, nameless, without an explicit origin, just presence. The serpent enters the scene not with violence, but with words, and this in itself is a key to interpretation. It speaks, it questions, it proposes a choice. It does not deceive, as many repeat without reading. It asks, did God really say? It is an invitation to doubt, to thought, to free will. Eve is not forcefully seduced. She is provoked to see differently. And by eating the fruit, she doesn't just sin, she awakens. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. That's the point. Before, there was innocence. Then there is consciousness. And consciousness is the beginning of all transformation, and also of all responsibility. Therefore, many scholars suggest that the fall was not a punishment, but a necessary step, a break with the state of ignorance, a transition from passivity to discernment. The impact of this gesture resonates to this day. It is as if, at that moment, humanity had been ripped from the womb of creation to begin its own journey. But why was this act guided by the serpent? Why not an angel, a heavenly voice, a direct revelation from the divine? Perhaps because not all revelation comes from the light. Some come from the shadow, from contrast, from what confronts us and forces us to choose. Goodness that has never been tested is not complete, and faith that has never been challenged is merely repetition. The serpent then assumes a catalytic role, not as a villain in the moral sense we learn in Sunday school, but as a mirror that reveals the dormant power within the human being. And if you look deeply, you'll see that this moment in Genesis isn't about a naive woman deceived by a treacherous animal. It's about the first confrontation between submission and freedom, between blind obedience and active perception. Of course, this reading is disturbing. It defies centuries of interpretation. It threatens structures. But it is precisely therein lies the hidden truth, not in what is explicit, but in what was deliberately left between the lines. The backstage of creation is not a lit stage. It is a dark, dense space, full of symbols, where each element has multiple layers. And the serpent is, perhaps, the most multifaceted of all. When we look at it through the eyes of tradition, we see sin. But when we look through the eyes of symbolic consciousness, we see power. The serpent is a cycle, a renewal, a continuous movement. It sheds its skin as if casting off the old to make way for the new. And isn't this precisely what we seek on our own spiritual journeys? A mindset that evolves, an understanding that expands, a soul that dares to leave the comfort of innocence to enter the complexity of existence. So perhaps the serpent was never just a character in the narrative. Perhaps it represents the very force that lifts us from stagnation, the spark that ignites internal conflict and forces us to look at what we avoid, our decisions, our impulses, our desire to know more even when that knowledge costs us peace. Write it down. I'm on that journey too. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what we've been taught about the serpent may be just one part and, perhaps the most convenient of a much larger story. And if you're truly willing to delve behind the scenes of creation, you'll realize that layers have been stripped away, suppressed, or replaced over time. The serpent, for example, wasn't always described as an enemy. Long before it was associated with sin, it held a sacred place in countless cultures and writings that are now considered apocryphal or simply ignored. In ancient civilizations, the serpent was a symbol of wisdom, eternity, and transformation. In Egypt, for example, the uraeus, a serpent that adorned the pharaoh's crowns, was a sign of divine royalty. It didn't threaten, it protected. In some mystical Jewish lineages, such as Kabbalah, there are references to serpentine forces that guard the portals of hidden knowledge. And in Gnostic texts, such as those found at Nag Hammadi, the serpent is interpreted not as an enemy of God, but as a messenger of Sophiatha exiled, divine wisdom. These records point to a reality that contrasts sharply with traditional theology. The serpent as guide, as revealer, as activator of human awakening. It's uncomfortable to admit, but perhaps part of the hidden truth has been distorted precisely because it's too empowering, because it offers a free, questioning, and unsubmissive mindset. And for systems that need control, inner freedom has always been a threat. Consider the impact that a figure representing the fusion between the divine and the instinctive, between creation and chaos, would have throughout history. The serpent embodies this paradox. It crawls on the earth, yet carries the symbol of infinity. It lives in silence, yet transforms with a single movement. In many spiritual traditions, it represents cyclical time, the eternal return, the flow of life that never breaks. And when this image is reinterpreted as diabolical, something precious is lost: the ability to see the sacred in the ambiguous. This deconstruction isn't simple. It requires a courageous journey through theological ruins, crystallized concepts and dogmas that are repeated without being understood. But it's in this process that revelations are born. When you confront what you've always been told with, what you begin to feel, transformation becomes inevitable. And the serpent, at this point, ceases to be just a character and becomes an internal archetype of force that challenges but also awakens. Many texts considered heretical by church councils describe this archetype as a gift, not a curse, a call to spiritual responsibility, a reminder that to know is, above all, to know oneself. and that true knowledge, that which is not found in books, but in symbols, is dangerous because it cannot be tamed. Throughout history, whenever a civilization sought to understand the cycles of life, death, fertility, and regeneration, there it was, the serpent coiled at the center of its myths, not as an enemy of light, but as guardian of the balance between light and shadow. And perhaps that's why it never disappeared. It was simply disguised, hidden, fragmented into narratives that keep us within limits. But if you've come this far, perhaps you've already crossed the first frontier. Perhaps you've already sensed there's more. And that this more can't be learned with simple answers. Write it down. I want to see beyond the surface. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it is precisely when the Bible falls silent that other texts banned, forgotten, or buried for centuries begin to whisper. Voices that have survived time, hidden in caves, translated in fragments, protected by a few and forbidden by many. Writings such as the Book of Enoch, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Sumerian records that predate even biblical Hebrew reveal to us a constant presence. The serpent, not as an intruder, but as an essential part of the mystery of creation. In the Book of Enoch, for example, there are references to beings who possessed divine knowledge and transmitted it to humans' knowledge of the heavens, cycles, the names of the stars, the roots of time. And, interestingly, in some Gnostic traditions, it is said that this knowledge was brought by a serpentine entity, associated with the wisdom that the arcane sought to conceal. We're not talking about magic. We're talking about access. A bridge between what is permitted and what has been sealed by invisible orders. In even older Sumerian records, we find figures like Ningishita, a serpent god who represented the passage between worlds and was seen as the guardian of the knowledge of life and death. He did not judge, he allowed the passage. It was he who decided who was ready to know. In a time when heaven was not yet separated from earth, and the gods walked among men, the serpent was not a threat. It was a portal. The curious thing is that these traditions, separated by centuries and continents, converge in a single symbol. This is no coincidence. When an image is repeated across so many cultures with different names but a similar essence, it's because it carries something beyond folklore. It carries a code, sign that transcends language, religion, or time. And this code, more often than not, is only accessible to those who dare to peer behind the scenes of history. There's a reason so many of these texts were considered heretical. They didn't deny God. On the contrary, they affirmed that divinity was greater, more complex, and closer than anyone imagined. But they also said that the path to this God lay within, and that the serpent was part of that path, a key that opens inner doors, forcing the gaze to leave the surface and delve into the mirrors of the soul. This version of the serpent is disturbing because it challenges the binary moral logic imposed on us: right or wrong, light or darkness, obedience or rebellion. These hidden texts, however, speak of a third element, conscience. And it is precisely conscience that transforms any choice into revelation. They invite us not to worship the serpent, but to understand it. And that changes everything. When you come into contact with these revelations, you realize that traditional theology may not have hidden these narratives simply for control purposes, but because it knew the impact they could have on our way of life. The mindset changes. Spiritual responsibility ceases to be outsourced to institutions and becomes intimate, personal, and non-transferable. The journey ceases to be about pleasing the divine and becomes about embodying it. Even in the parts that scare us, it's uncomfortable, I know. But discomfort is a sign that something is moving. And when that happens, there's no turning back. Write it down. I'm seeing what I've never seen. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because the question that has resonated since the dawn of humanity has never been simply, who is the serpent? But what does it represent within us? For millennia, peoples far apart have looked at this same symbol and seen not a common threat, but something that transcended form, name, and definition. For some, it was a being. For others, a force. For many, a hidden code engraved in the very fabric of creation. In the Gnostic tradition, the serpent is not the villain. It is the bearer of hidden light, the one who awakens human consciousness, by revealing that the creator of the material world, the demiurge, is not the supreme God, but a limited emanation. The serpent, in this context, becomes the liberator, the one who offers the fruit not of sin, but of lucidity. A lucidity that is dangerous because it dispels illusions. It does not impose, it merely offers. And this is enough to destabilize an entire paradigm of blind obedience. Even in ancient Egypt, the serpent was nearly omnipresent. From Renenutet, goddess of fertility and abundance, to the men's serpent, which protected the god Ra on his nocturnal journey through the underworld. It is always linked to the cycle of life, transformation, and spiritual protection. But it is in the image of the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail, that one of the most powerful representations resides: the eternal return, the unity of all opposites, the infinite flow between birth, death, and rebirth. It is no wonder that this symbol has spanned the ages, being adopted by alchemists, mystics, and even modern science. In some symbolic interpretations of DNA, the Hindus, for their part, saw the serpent not as a symbol of perdition, but as vital energy itself. The Kundalini, this serpent dormant at the base of the spine, is described as a latent power that, when awakened, leads to the expansion of consciousness. As it rises, chakra by chakra, the human being not only transforms, they become something else. It is an internal rebirth, a crossing of portals. In pre-Columbian America, the Mayans and Aztecs spoke of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a creator god associated with knowledge, art, the calendar, and cosmic order. He came not to deceive, but to teach. He came not to divide, but to restore lost harmony. What unites all these accounts is the same pulse, the serpent as an intermediary. Between worlds, it is not content with the margins. It crosses, it transits. It transgresses boundaries not out of vanity, but because it was made to do so. Its nature is not fixed, it's fluid. And perhaps it is this fluidity that frightens us so, because it forces us to grapple with something the linear mind fears: paradox. The serpent is light and shadow, beginning and end, wisdom and danger. It forces us to leave binary logic and enter the realm of the symbolic, where the language of the soul begins to operate. It is in this territory that theologies become incomplete. Maps and mythologies reveal themselves as keys. When you understand that the serpent is not just what people say about it, but everything it can represent within you, something begins to move. A kind of truth that cannot be taught only awakened. This is the silent transformation these symbols carry. They don't speak aloud, they whisper between the lines. And only those with eyes trained in the invisible can see it. That's why some see only a crawling animal, ... and others see the dance of divine energy itself in archetypal form. What changes isn't the symbol. It's the gaze of the beholder. Write it down. Now I understand the symbol. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because as we pierce the veils of what has been recorded, re-recorded, translated, reinterpreted, and finally taught in religious institutions, we begin to realize that there are voices that didn't shout, they merely whispered. Voices of masters who sought not pulpits or followers, but understanding. Voices that spoke to those who seek not only to hear, but to feel. They are the invisible sages. Men and women who, over the centuries, delved into the subtext of creation and perceived something few have dared reveal. A serpentine intelligence exists, not a physical creature, but a consciousness, a pattern, a living vibration, subtle, yet absolutely present. This idea appears, for example, in the esoteric writings of ancient rabbis, those who saw the Torah not just as a book, but as a coded energy field. They spoke of a presence that moved between verses, challenging the limits of the literal, proposing interpretations that could only be accessed through inner silence and symbolic decoding. This intelligence, according to them, was not evil. It was transgressive, and, precisely for this reason, revelatory. In Christian mystical circles, such as among theosophists and certain initiates of the Sekissus tradition, this serpentine consciousness was understood as a kind of spiritual agent that tested the seeker's heart, not as punishment, but as preparation. They said that this force, formless, but with intention, manifests itself whenever a soul is ready to climb a rung on the ladder of understanding. And the test almost always begins with a question: do you really want to know? Because those who want to know must be ready to let go of what they thought they knew. It is at this point that the barrier of religion is broken and we enter the realm of revelation. Because this intelligence does not belong to a doctrine. It circulates between cultures, manifests itself behind the scenes of the most profound spiritual experiences, and often appears disguised as doubt, crisis, and deconstruction. It is the moment when everything seems to collapse, laid to be rebuilt, with a more honest, more vibrant foundation, more aligned with the true purpose of existence. If you've ever experienced this, you've probably felt it. A silent call that didn't come from outside, but from within. A restlessness that wouldn't leave you until you were willing to question it. That's how it works. Formless, faceless, but with a precise intention to free you from the illusion. And the more you resist, the more it surrounds you. Because it doesn't come as a threat. It comes as a mirror. It shows you what you don't want to see and, at the same time, what you need most. This serpentine consciousness for these sages was not a mythological figure or a biblical character. It was a layer of creation itself, an initiatory stage, that all who wish to access the hidden truth must pass through. And this changes everything. Because when you realize that it is not out there, but within the process of awakening itself, you understand that the confrontation with the serpent is, in fact, a confrontation with the inner shadows that guard the portals of the sacred, and that takes courage. Because accessing this level of interpretation is no longer about memorizing verses, but about living symbols. It's about recognizing the cycles, the patterns, the archetypes, and understanding that real spirituality doesn't happen on stage, but behind the scenes of the soul. The serpent, then, ceases to be an external enemy and becomes a threshold, a point of no return between what you were and what you're about to become. Write it down. I have already recognized this calling. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because when we look back on this entire journey we've traveled thus far, one thing becomes inescapable. The serpent has never been just what we've been told. It appears too often in too many cultures, with too many powerful roles to be reduced to a caricature of temptation and fall. Perhaps what it truly represents has never fit into the officially accepted narrative. And perhaps that's precisely why it has been demonized. Because what it holds isn't poison, it's a key. But not every key is available to everyone. Some only reveal themselves when you're willing to turn even without knowing exactly what you'll find on the other side. And turning that key takes courage. It requires facing your own beliefs, confronting the walls of tradition, and recognizing that many of the truths we accept have been filtered by interests that have nothing to do with the divine. This is an internal decision, a kind of silent transformation that begins when you stop looking outside and start remembering. The serpent, at this point, is no longer a figure. It becomes a living metaphor for awakening, a symbol of the passage between worlds, from the known to the hidden, from surface to depth, from repetition to revelation. It's as if it were always there, on the fringes of consciousness, waiting for the right gaze to decipher it. And once that happens, there's no turning back. Because what's seen cannot be unseen, and what we see in that moment is that perhaps everything was designed so that only those willing to truly seek it could find it. That's why many pass by it and don't notice, because they're looking with eyes of fear, not surrender. They're trapped in the image and miss the meaning. But those who feel, those who traverse, discover something that cannot be taught, only revealed in silence. That's where the serpent becomes master, not by dictating rules, but by exposing what was already there, hidden, waiting. Perhaps Eden was never a physical place. Perhaps it was a state of consciousness. And the expulsion was not a punishment, but a rite of passage. The moment when humans were no longer kept in ignorance and were thrust into the responsibility of their own journey. And who allowed this? Leap, the serpent. If so, then she was never the enemy. She was the catalyst, the access code, the consciousness that dismantles illusion so that truth can inhabit. And perhaps that's why so many feared her. Because it's easier to live under orders than to construct meaning. More comfortable to repeat rituals than to face the vastness of mystery. But if you've made it this far, it's a sign that you're ready. Ready to embrace this possibility with reverence, but without fear, because the truth doesn't hurt, it liberates. And sometimes it comes disguised as everything we've been told to avoid. Comment here. I saw the serpent. You've made it this far. It's because something inside you recognized this path. Maybe not in so many words, but with that silent feeling that there's more, and that it's worth keeping searching. So, if this content resonated with you, if at any point something here touched you deeply, please leave a like note out of obligation. But because this gesture keeps the connection we've built alive, take advantage and subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is a fragment of something bigger, and little by little, the pieces begin to fit together. And if you felt this message was truly for you, comment below. I'm with you until the end. So I know you are with me on this journey. And I can continue bringing revelations that don't fit in books, but that live between the lines of creation. Oh, and there's a video right here that complements all this in a way you might never have imagined. Click and stay with me there, because what comes next goes even deeper.